Guy I considered a close personal friend hunted down his ex, shot her with a rifle, and then turned the gun on himself. Neighbors reported hearing him say, "You knew this was going to happen." This just goes to show how difficult it is to spot an abuser in the wild. Worked with a guy who got done for manslaughter. He bashed someone's head in with a table in a pub. This was after he stabbed a guy in the chest with darts. This was over a darts game. He also served time for beating a policeman into a coma with the policeman's own truncheon after the policeman caught him breaking into a car. That whole event sounds oddly British for some reason. A former coworker murdered his friend when the friend agreed to work with the police to bring down my coworker for stealing a shipment of human growth hormone. Apparently it was a vicious murder. They burned the body. But it's been a while. My coworker ended up being on the run for many years and was eventually turned in after his story ran on America's Most Wanted. His fiancée saw it and he confessed who he was to her. She waited until he was asleep and went to a payphone to turn him in. What was he planning on doing with all that growth hormone? Burn a baby alive. The story. I knew someone at a music school. She then left, and one day she showed up at the school again because she was stopping music and wanted to sell her instrument. She told me she was living in an isolated community in the middle of the mountains and looked so happy and radiant that I felt jealous. A couple of months later I turned the TV on and there she was. The community was actually a sect commanded by a guy who claimed to be the reincarnation of Jesus. He had impregnated a woman from the sect and said the baby was the Antichrist and had to die. They burned the baby alive when he was only 2 days old. Ant Hill kids. Edit. I couldn't remember details of the case I was referring to, so I did some digging, and I guess there's a handful of infant murders within sect cult things JFC. I only met him once as a kid, but my granddad's brother-in-law. He approached me and my mum in a cafe. I was 8 and tried starting normal conversational small talk. My mum panicked and asked him what the hell he was doing out of prison. He brushed her question off and he knelt down to talk to me, which made my mum pick me up, sling me over her shoulder, and run back to the car. I just remember being so scared by her sudden moves I quietly burst into tears in the car and we drove halfway home. Mum then stopped in a supermarket car park, got in the back, unbuckled me, and we cuddled in the back for what felt like days, most likely an hour tops, whilst we both cried. I had no clue what was happening, but Mum calmed me down, and she kept saying "You're safe. I love you" over and over. I found out years later he slit my granddad's sister, his wife's, throat and brutally beat her to death. Hence my mum's fear. You sound like you have a good mom. I had an acquaintance who owned a iron working shop. Some employee of his thought he was fabulously wealthy because he was well off. The dirtball employee went to their house and tortured 4 of them to death to get their fabulous wealth. $40,000. Unfortunately the housekeeper was there as well and they tortured her too. The junkies ordered pizza and left their DNA to be found. Burned the house. Really very sad. This guy was known to hire guys who had criminal records and give them a second chance. His son was 10 years old. I remember when this case was all over the news. I think the shop owner had 2 older daughters that survived because they were away at school. Her 2-year-old daughter drowned under suspicious circumstances. Nothing could be proved. About 3 years or so later, she had another kid, also drowned under suspicious circumstances. She was investigated but found nothing, attributed to shitty coincidence. Couple more years later, she had a 3rd kid with her man. Father came home early to find that she wasn't in the house, but his son was left alone in the bathtub. He was dead by that point. She got slapped with 3 murder charges and life. WTF. Why would someone do that? Just don't have more kids. My father beat the S** out of my mother and myself when I was a toddler. I have an uneven skull because of it. Until I found out, I thought it was a birth defect. I didn't find this out from my mother until I was an adult when I had to take him to court because he had opened numerous credit cards with my social security number when I was a kid and had tanked my credit by the time I was 18. What a fucking piece of S***. When I was a kid I was in the hospital for some surgery. In the next bed over was a kid who was younger than me in a full body cast. Turns out his dad was drunk and ran over him with the car. But that's not the worst part. His dad, apparently a hopeless alcoholic, committed suicide. But that's not the worst part. A few years ago, I decided to look for the kid on the internet and see how he was doing. Turns out, he killed his wife with a chainsaw and then killed himself with a chainsaw. https://www.bcphiladelphia.com/news/national international/husband killed estranged wife with chainsaw used machine to take own life coroner/97883/ close bracket. But that's not the worst part. Their 14-year-old son found them. That would f*** you up for life. Deciding to die by chainsaw is another level of crazy. A guy I knew killed his father in front of his mother and younger brother trying to protect his mum from severe abuse. After he served his sentence, the family accepted him back, and they've been living a normal life to this day. That started off really messed up, but turned into something completely understandable. Glad they accepted him back. Two guys I went to school with, one primary school and one high school, kidnapped a woman, raped her, disemboweled her, and cut her throat. She survived and testified. They are both in jail for life. You can read more here. https://althat'sinteresting.com/Alison Botha. JFC, she had to hold her head from falling backwards because she was practically decapitated, and hold her intestines in. Just, wow. Someone I was close friends with till college was raping his wife's daughters from her first marriage for years. He was also filming it and distributed the material and was teaching other pedos internet security and how to use the dark web. A laptop involved in a sting in the UK undid all his careful trail covering. The investigation revealed over a decade of traceable data of his activities building a CP criminal network. I don't like to think about it. I thought for sure we knew the same guy until I read the UK. I know a guy who did the same thing to his stepdaughter. It's absolutely disgusting to remember all the times you joked around and had a good time with them. When we were in school, this boy from our year, we were 13 years old or so at the time, was with his two older brothers and kidnapped a man. The man was dating their sister, and at that time, people were very protective. If you dated someone's sister, they took him to a petrol station and covered him in petrol. They then took him to a forest and burned him alive. All three brothers went to prison, but since they were minors I don't think they got that many years. When I was 21 over 22 I bump into the guy from my year in a takeaway, and he tells me he's working at the local supermarket. Few months later I end up working in that same supermarket, and he goes to me, anyone messes with you let me know. I'm thinking now I don't want them dead in a forest. How did the sister feel about all this? If my family did something like that I would never talk to them again. Imagine you're excited to get your first kiss, then find out the dude got burnt alive by your own kin, just for liking you. Disgusting. I didn't know him, but I do now. 30-year-old meth head went on an hour-long rampage in his car, driving along the wrong side of the highways of my town attempting to crash head-on with other road users. He was unsuccessful until he crashed head-on with my 17-year-old brother. The meth head was doing an estimated 140 km/h and my brother was doing 110, the speed limit. He just got sentenced to 10 years in jail yesterday, and my brother now has lifelong injuries from the crash. Weirdest part of it all is that all the media and news reports of the accident were either silenced or made to be removed, and we don't know why. Maybe the meth head comes from money and his family is trying to protect their name. I was forced to have oral and anal sex with a 25-year-old when I was 9 and in foster care. I lived with him for 8 years. We would have sex 2 to 3 times a week and I never told any social workers because I didn't want to be sent to a group home. Holy F********, I'm sorry that happened to you. A friend was arrested on over 70 charges including drugging and raping children. There was a whole police operation involved. A surgeon I'd had for 2 surgeries and was following up on complications was arrested for child porn. As someone who was abused as a child, it sort of felt like it was inescapable. I'm sorry it felt that way. What a piece of shit, the lot of them. One of my childhood friends was diagnosed as schizophrenic in his early 20s, went off his meds for a bit of time, and had an episode, bludgeoned his mom to death, who was my parents' friend. They found him in a fetal position crying, and not understanding what happened. He committed suicide a few years later while in jail. That's so awful for everybody involved. Imagine your brain just suddenly turning on you, and becoming your enemy. My mother tried to kill my father when I was a toddler by taping up the windows in our apartment. She turned on the gas at the stove, took me and left. She knew my dad would light a cigarette upon returning home. She was banking on it. Luckily my dad was able to smell the gas leaking under the door. Did she get the idea from The Simpsons? One of the early Sideshow Bob episodes has him attempting almost the same thing. Guy I knew from Sioux Falls, SD was convicted of many counts of rape on a child. My kids had spent time him. He was a family friend and they called him uncle. I had suspicions and cut off contact. Couple years later, he was arrested and convicted. He was only interested in boys. My son swears this dude didn't touch him. I hope he rots. What made you suspicious? I live down the road from Terry Joe Volner. He rode my bus every day and was also a violent, horrible person. He murdered a 5-year-old because he had feelings for the kid's mom and I guess she didn't feel the same. So he murdered one of her kids, took a picture of the child's body and sent it to the child's mom and told her he was going to kill her other kids, that he was babysitting if she didn't come home right now. He got life. Then he beat his cellmate to death with his bare hands so brutally they considered the death penalty. He got life again. Edit, a word. You know it's going to be real bad when they use the person's full name. I knew a guy in the Marines. He was already a shithead, but one day he suddenly got orders back to the US. He was just gone. Turned out that the FBI had been monitoring him trying to groom little girls online and sending nudes. The FBI arrested him when his plane landed. Probably got him as he came down the steps. Cousin caught by a police sting on a pedophile chat room, was organizing meeting a woman to abuse her children in front of her. Went to prison, not for long enough. Unfathomable that some people defend him as he didn't do anything yet. My father was caught in a similar sting, but the bastard didn't even get jail time. 2 years probation and 25 years sex offender registration. He died 13 years into the registration period, and my mom and I had quite the celebration when we found out. A cousin had his 2 young children call their mom. They were divorced, and it was his weekend with them to say goodnight. He put them to bed and shot them dead before pulling the gun on himself. I used to work in a preschool, and one of the dads did the same thing. He was in divorce proceedings from his much younger wife and barricaded his doors before setting fire to his flat, killing himself and their 2 little girls. I hate the term extended suicide. The man was scum. I stupidly went and read some of the social media posts he wrote that night, and it was incredibly hate-filled and self-pitying in the worst possible way. My cousin molested me for about 2 years. She was 6 years older than me, didn't have a good childhood, and turned to drugs. She passed away last year. The abuse began when I was 6 to 7, and she was 12 to 13. Sounds like someone needs to look into your aunt and uncle. That's not normal behavior for a 12-year-old and most likely were repeating the cycle of abuse.